Okay, good morning, everybody. We're at
Good morning.
6B.
Good morning.
Morning, we're at 6B towards the bottom. Let's see. The second line from the bottom. So we've been discussing the responsibilities of neighbors to contribute to walls between their properties, both for initially we discussed for privacy reasons, but yesterday we encountered the idea of also needing a partition, which minimum size would be smaller, but just to indicate that you don't want you want a barrier to prevent someone from wandering onto your property, or not wandering, but trespassing on your property. Okay, and now we come to a case. Hanu Beitre, there were these two people, Dahavu Daire. They jointly owned a house. One lived in the upstairs, one lived downstairs. Itvar Tatai. Now it starts to sink, right? So the building is sinking into the ground, and access to the lower level is restricted. Amarle Tatali Lai, so the downstairs guy says to the upstairs guy, Tavanithnie, let's fix this house because like I can't walk in my door. Amarle, the upstairs guy says, I'm not shocker because you're not. I got no problem. I'm fine the way I am. I don't have any problem that the building is sinking. So Amarle Istre Anavabne. So the downstairs guy says, okay, I understand. I'll pay for it. I will demolish the house and rebuild it. It's on me, even if you're not going to contribute. Amar, Leisli Duchta Lamedabar. Where am I going to live in the meantime? Amarle, Ana Ogar Lach Duchta. I'll rent you a place. We'll get you a temporary apartment to live in while we rebuild. Amarle, Lo Tarachna. It's too much trouble to move. So the downstairs guy says, "Look, Tuesdaly, like that's very nice for you, So it's too much trouble for you to move temporarily, but I got nowhere to live. I can't get into the house." So the upstairs guy says, "Shuf akresech." So like you can't walk into the house because the doorway is too close to the ground. So crawl in, not my problem. Amar Chama, Bedina Kamake. For Chama says, he's actually acting legally. The upstairs guy we can't compel him to do what the downstairs guys want. That only applies if the house sunk to a point where there's still 10 tfachim in the height of the doorway. So you can still get into the house. But if it's less than a 10 tefach height to get into the doorway, the downstairs guy can say, mi asara rishusa didihu. The Veloma Shabitlach. Like I'm entitled to at least 10 tfachim of airspace, right? Now, if your floor has sunk to within my 10 tfachim of airspace, in other words, there's less than 10 tfachim of airspace in my apartment, in my half of the house, then like you're now encroaching on my territory. So then I have the right to force you to do something about it. And also another restriction, Delo Asnu Game Hadare. That's if they didn't have a clause in their agreement specifying what would happen if the house sunk. Obviously, if they had a clause in their agreement, the original deed to the house or whatever, saying that if the house sinks, then we agree to rebuild, then obviously they would have to rebuild. If they had a clause that said that they would rebuild under such circumstances, then they both have to participate in demolishing and rebuilding the house. Now the Gemara says, okay, so if there is a clause, what if it's a general clause, like if the house becomes uninhabitable, or if the house sinks too much, then we'll rebuild. But what is too much? What if they didn't specify the exact measurement? They said before Rabbah, Amar Mishmei Rav Nachman. So this is all sourced from Rav Nachman. Ba'osa Shashaninu. Um, the measurement, if the measurement is not specified in the agreement, then it's implied that we're going to the measurement will be, the appropriate measurement will be like this Mishnah. Rumo kachatzi archo kachatzi archo. That the regular kind of height of a house, like the ceiling height, would be half of the length and half of the width. So it's a proportion basically. If it sinks to less than this proportion, then the agreement would be triggered. Amalu Rabba. Rabba replied, Lava minaluchu lo titlu be buke surike Rav Nachman. Haven't I told you before? Don't hang empty jugs on Rav Nachman. In other words, don't put words in Rav Nachman's mouth. He's disputing that Rav Nachman ever applied this rule to our case. This is what Rav Nachman actually said. Ki dedaire inshe. When do you have to keep the diary in shape? When is if they have a non-specific agreement, at what point does the upstairs neighbor have to agree to rebuild the house? Keep the diary in shape. Like normal living, it's like just assess if it becomes so that the downstairs guy can't live normally, then the agreement is triggered. Again, this is only if they have an agreement. Becama. So that's kind of not a specific measurement. What is the measurement? The Gemara wants to know. Rafuna Beri de Rabbi Yeshua. Kiheche the Aile Isturaisa the Mechuza Vahadar. It has to be enough airspace so that you can bring or bundles of reeds from Mechuza and turn them around in all directions. Okay, if the airspace is not sufficient to accommodate these mechuzah bundles of reeds, then that's the measurement. Okay, well, that doesn't seem so specific either, but fine. How covered to have a bane ashisa achore kave de chavre? There was a guy who was building a wall against the windows of his neighbor's house, so he's blocking the guy's view and then the guy's light into his windows. Amarle, come up, hopefully, you're making my house dark. Amar, so the guy who's building the wall says, Sacharna lachacha, I'll close up this window. I'll make you a window that's higher than my wall. So I understand I'm blocking a window. Let me replace the window with a window that's above my wall so that you'll still get light. So the neighbor says, Amarle, kamarsli lashisai. You're gonna you're going to knock a new hole in the wall and brick up the old window. It's like my wall will be weaker. What I'll do is I'll demolish the whole wall, from the top until where I want to put the new window. And I'll rebuild that part of the wall. And and then I'll make the new windows for you. That will be higher than my wall. So I'm not going to be weakening your wall. Amarle, so the guy with the window says, Ashisa mitata atika umil el. So now what you're proposing is, my wall is going to be half old and half new. Lo kaima. That's not going to work. That's not a stable wall. Amarle, so the builder says, so I'll tear down the whole wall for you. Rebuild the wall. I'll put the new window in it for you. So I'll replace the whole wall. So the guy with the window says, so still, I'm going to have like one new wall in an old house. It's low kaima. It's not stable. So you know what? I'm going to replace your entire house. I'll knock down the whole house and rebuild it for you with the windows in the right place. Where am I going to live in the meantime? I'll rent a place for you to live. I don't feel like moving. Rav Chama says, just like we said before, the guy with the window has a valid point. No matter what, he's going to lose out. Even if the guy rebuilds his house, he still says he doesn't want it because it's too much trouble to move. So Heinevach. So the Gemara says, well, we've heard this before. This is exactly the same ruling about this house with the window as we were discussing before with the upstairs downstairs. What do you need to have both cases for? Kamashmal and the Gemara says, you know why? Even though it's telling you that even though this isn't like the guy's regular house where he lives in all the time, it's just he uses it like a store, a warehouse or something. Um, so even though um, even so, he can still claim that's too much to move my stuff out of there, right? It's not even disrupting his living arrangements. It's just like a storehouse or a storeroom, but he can still say, I don't feel like doing it. There were two brothers that had an inheritance, an estate that they split. Chad Matye Ispalira, V'chad Matye Tarbisa. One got the house, one got the garden. Azalahu de Matye Tarbisa. So the garden guy comes. V'kabane Ashisa Puma de Ispalida. He built a wall around the garden, which blocked the light coming into the house. Come awfully. Come off fault, Alay. You're making my house dark. Alay, the garden guy says, bididi kapanina. Well, too bad, but like I'm building on my property. You don't have the you don't have any rights to the light coming into the house. And the Rashi points out that like what he's saying is you haven't had 3 years of the light coming in to establish your right to it, since we just inherited this property. It hasn't been 3 years, so you don't have the right to the light coming in, which doesn't seem quite fair. Amar Rav Chama, B'din Kamar La. Rav Chama says the garden guy has the right to build the wall. Ravina Ravashi, so Ravina asked Ravashi about this. How is this different than the following brisa? Two brothers had an estate. They split. One took the vineyard and one took the grain field. The vineyard owner has can clear a 4 amma strip of the adjoining grain field, because we don't want to have kilayim. Is it kilayim or no? It's just for damage, right? Like if you cultivate the wheat field right up to the border of the vineyard, that's going to damage the vineyard. So the vineyard guy can clear a 4 amma strip around his vineyard from the other guy's property, from the grain field. Shalmanas Kain because we're assuming that this was a condition of the division. In other words, when they divided the field, the estate, the guy who got the vineyard has the right to assume that he was going to get a full vineyard with its full potential, and that would require a strip around it of clearing a strip around it from the wheat field. So um, so in that case, like, why is the vineyard guy different than the guy with the garden and the house, right? It's the guy who's got the vineyard that is allowed to encroach on the rights of the guy who's got the wheat field, right? So why wouldn't you say the same thing in the case of the house and garden? From Malay, Ravashi answers, Hasam de Aluladade. Like in the case of the Brisa, it wasn't, that was when they split the field, that was the understanding that we assume there was an understanding of an equal split will require, that we allow the vineyard its full potential. Like, so what about the house and the garden? Like, why would you say the same thing, right? It's also an inheritance that they split. We're talking about idiots. Like, you think that they didn't assess the different, the relative values, and like it if it was a case of an even split that would require the house guy to agree to uh, having his light blocked, then that would have been part of the deal, right? We're not so Amarle, Nehida, Aluladade. Yes, they may have agreed on the relative value. Deme livne kishure v'hudre. They may have, they certainly got a property assessor to, determine the value of the garden and the value of the building and the lot and everything. This has all um, been factored in when they did the split. But maybe they didn't consider the air rights, right? Maybe like it's not it's not normal procedure to consider the air rights. This was like an unusual situation that would not have been agreed to in advance, and that's why the garden guy is indeed allowed to build a wall. The Lamale, so Ravina says, but let the house guy say to the garden guy, Mekara is Polida Palgatli. Like, um, originally, when we did the split, like my house was a perfectly good split, because it had a lot of light. And now you're messing it up. Hashna mashpizli idruna. You are reducing the value of my of my half, right? By building the wall and blocking my light. Roshim Barashi, so Roshim answers, Shema Ba'alma Polagle. Um, what's he saying here? Shema Ba'alma Polagle. Like when you agreed to split the garden, one guy gets the garden and one guy gets the house. Um, it's um, like the house it's not like a full, like you call it a house, right? But you really mean a proper house, right? Like you haven't specified that it's a house with the air rights or with the sunlight rights. You just called it a house, but uh, so by doing that, you're by saying that like you're trying to assume that the right to the house includes the right to sunlight in the house, but that's not the case. Like when I say I'm selling you a house, you assume that it's got windows, that it's got light coming in, right? Um, but that's not a valid assumption. In other words, I told you I'm selling you a great house, but it's a house, right? A house is still a house without the sunlight. Milo Tanya, and I have support for this from a brisa. Homer base core offer ani mocher l'cha. If I say I'm going to sell you a base core of dirt, afal pi she'eno elo lasach, even though it isn't even half that size, higia. It works like the sales valid shalom mocher lo elo shema, because a base core is like saying I'm selling you an acre, right? And the meaning of acre can be understood to be not specifically the size of an acre. Nobody really knows how big an acre is anyway. I know Charlie's going to know if he's here, but it just means a field, right? So the fact that people say a base car doesn't necessarily mean an actual measure of base car. It means a field. Woohoo, the mystery base car. But that if people actually use that nomenclature, right? If people actually call a field a base car field, um, even if it's not the measure of a base car, then we can assume that you're going by the name and not by the actual measure. Now, pardes anymore. But if you say I'm selling you an orchard, alpha pisha ain bo rimonim, even if there's no trees, no pomegranates in it, if it's a pomegranate field, higio, it works. Shema, because when you say an orchard, you don't necessarily mean an orchard full of fruit. It means an orchard with trees. If that's what the nomenclature is locally. Or if you say I'm selling you a vineyard, even if there's no actual grapes in it, it's a valid sale, because it's called the vineyard, even though it's like if I'm going to sell you Martha's Vineyard, you can't come and complain to me that there's no grapes on Martha's Vineyard. No, that's the name of the place. It's called a vineyard. That's what it's really called. So Gemara says, well, midame, can you compare those two? Shema Zabinilach. In the case of the orchard or the vineyard, the guy can say, look, this is called a vineyard. I sold you a vineyard. There's no grapes in it because that's not what vineyard means in this context. But in the case of the house and the garden, adata the hachi palge. He could say, look, when we split this, and I took the house. I assumed there was going to be sunlight in the house. I was assuming when we split and I agreed to take the house, it's going to be a house like, when it was our father's, when it belonged to our father, it was a house with lots of light. And now I've taken the house on that understanding, and now you're blocking the light. So that gives you the right to insist on keeping light. Amalei, so they said to him about this. Amalei Mar Yenuko Mar Kashisha Bered Rav Chizal Ravashi. So they said to Ravashi, Nahardai Lotamayu. These Rav Chama and Shmuel, who we'll see in a minute, these people from Narda, they're consistent. Yamar Rav Nachman and Shmuel. Rav Nachman saying the name of Shmuel was from Narda. Ha'achin Shachalku. Brothers who split an estate, Enlan lo derech zel zeh, v'lo chalono zel zeh, v'lo sulmo zel zeh, v'lo amas hamayim zel zeh. They don't have rights against each other for I can't use your half anymore as an access road or windows or ladders or irrigation channel. Like if you split the land, you split it, and you don't have any. The guy who has the one half doesn't have any more rights on the other half. And be careful about these things because this is halachos kvos. This is established law. Rava Amar Yeshman, but Rava, or maybe it's Rav. The Bach thinks that this might be Rav, not Rava, who's the usual arguer with Shmuel. That they do have rights to each other. It's like if we had always used, the irrigation ditch in your half to irrigate my ditch, my half, then we should continue to do that according to Rav. Haushtar, there was another similar case. The Ashar Diasme, a IOU that was in an estate, and now the orphans own it. The Nafikale Tavra. There was a receipt, right? So the contract states I owe so and so $100, and now it's been inherited by his son. And now, so the son's owed $100, but now comes to light a receipt that it was already paid back. So Amar Rav Chama says, "Agbuye lo magbinale." We can't collect on this contract. Umikra lo karinale, but we also don't destroy it. Right? Usually, if you have a loan document and you've determined that the loan's been paid off, then you destroy the loan document so it won't be used to collect again improperly. So Rav Chama says we're not sure what to do here, so we're not going to collect, but we're going to leave the IOU intact. Because it's a little fishy here. Like, how come this receipt only comes to light after the father's death? We don't collect because there's a receipt. But why don't we destroy the IOU? Maybe when the orphans grow older, they will be able to find, some proof. They might look into the matter, find witnesses, find more papers or whatever that influence the case. Umarile, and maybe they'll prove that the receipt is invalid. So that's why we're not going to act on. We're not going to act here. We're just going to leave things in limbo until later and see if it can be resolved. So these four things that Rav Chama ruled. Is this the halacha? Yeah, we rule like Rav Chama on all these things. Except for the last case of the receipt. Like we don't, you can't challenge the validity of a receipt unless there's some reason to, obviously, but it's just like challenging witnesses. The witnesses or the signatories to the receipt are considered witnesses. And that's kind of the foundation of the whole system is testimony of witnesses. So we are going to give primacy to to the receipt, which is based on the signatures of the witnesses. Um, we're going to give primacy to that. Mar Zutra read Rav Mariam, Mar Zutra said, but Hanami also Rav Chama. No, we're going to rule like Rav Chama that we leave it in limbo. To Isa the Tavra Malyu, because if it were a good receipt, Ibai Fukim Chayavu, and it should have come to light earlier. Milo Afke, since that didn't happen, Shmami knows Yufizaife. That's that indicates that this is likely a forged receipt. And why didn't it come to light until now? Maybe the guy isn't brazen enough to present a forged receipt to the actual guy who who purportedly signed the receipt, but the orphans, the estate, like they don't know for sure. They see this receipt, they don't know if it's true or not that their father paid it back. So we're assuming, since the receipt didn't come to light until after the death of the original lender, we can safely assume that it's not so valid, and we're not undermining the whole system. Okay, next Mishnah. So we're going to discuss, we've been discussing neighboring properties. Now we're going to discuss properties that border a joint courtyard. Kofinos olivnos by base shar videlos lachatzer. Anyone who's part of this courtyard, who's bordering on this courtyard, can be forced to build a gatehouse and a door, an entrance door for the courtyard, because it's considered common property, and this is the normal thing to do. Everyone has obligations to it. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Amar, Rabbi Shimon says, "Lo kol hachasir ruyos l'veishar." Not so. Not every courtyard deserves a gatehouse. So we'll see in the Gemara what this applies to. Now, any resident of a city can be taxed to build a wall and doors and a lock for the doors, a crossbar for the doors. Not every city needs a wall around it. Again, the Gemara will decide. We'll discuss which does and which doesn't. Now, how long do you have to live in the city to be part of this deal, right? Like if I'm only a temporary resident of the city, maybe I'm exempt from capital expenses because I'm only there temporarily. So my answer, the Mishnah says, 12 months. Once you've been living somewhere 12 months, you are liable to share in the capital expenses for the city. Kanaba based era. But if you buy a house there, how you can anshe your miyad. So that's if you're staying in a rented house or apartment. So then, like if you're considered temporary for until 1 year, but if you actually buy a house, then you are a full-fledged resident right away, and you can be taxed for these capital expenses. So the Gemara asks, "L'meimra de Beis Shar Mal Yusahi." So it sounds like the Mishnah is telling us that a Beis Shar, that a gatehouse is a good thing, right? Because you can be compelled to build it. It means that it's beneficial and necessary even to the courtyard. There was a certain tzaddik that Eliyahu Navi would visit regularly. He built a gatehouse, and then Eliyahu stopped coming. So Rashi explains that the gatehouse kept beggars out, right? So why did he build a gatehouse? Because he wanted to keep the beggars out. And then Eliyahu wasn't so thrilled with him anymore that he was avoiding his responsibilities to the indigent, and he stopped visiting. So in this case, the gatehouse prevented Eliyahu and Avi from visiting, and is considered a bad thing. So why would I be compelled to invest in something that degrades the property. Versus lokasha, hami gavai, hami barai. Depends if the gatehouse is inside, um, then that somehow blocks the beggars more than the gatehouse that's built outside. Okay. Hava hami barai, or you could answer differently that the gatehouse is outside. Velokasha, but why the different attitudes toward the gatehouse? Hadi Islay Dallas, Hadi Dallas. In uh, that Mishnah, the gatehouse had no door, or our Mishnah, the gatehouse has no door, so it's considered unambiguously positive. The case of the Eliyahu Hanavi was a gatehouse with a door, and that actually does keep out the indigent, and so it could be seen as negative. Or by the same way, you can answer Havaha Disley Dallas. No, we're talking about a gatehouse with a door. Lakasha Disley Posachas. The question is whether it has a doorknob. So, in other words, whether you could open the door from the outside. So, if the beggars can open the door from the outside, then it's unambiguously good to have a gatehouse. But if it blocks them, then it's also bad. Ibai a fourth view, fourth distinction could be Hava Disle Posachas. Now we're talking about a gatehouse that you can open the door. Velokasha, no problem. Hada Posachas Didei Migavai, Hada Posachas Didei Mibarai. It depends which side the doorknob is on, right? If you can only open it from the inside, then it blocks the poor and it's bad. If you can only open it from the outside, or also open it from the outside, then it's considered unambiguously good. Okay. So he said that you can force every resident around the courtyard to build the gatehouse and the door. Tanya, we have a brisa. Not every courtyard requires a gatehouse. Only if the courthouse opens to the public, then the gatehouse is positive. But if it's not opening to Rishus Harabim and a real Shar, then the gatehouse is optional. Then you can't say this is an unambiguous need. Rabbanan, so that seems reasonable. What are the Tanakhama in the Mishnah? Why do they say that you always need a gatehouse? Because even if you're not right up against Rishus Harabim, what if it's crowded? The streets are very busy. Then people will come. Will encroach closer to the courtyard, and then it's good to have a. It's still good to have a gatehouse. Now, Kofi also leave no here. Now we moved on to the city, right? That you can force people in the city to build the wall and the door and the lock. Rabbi Shimon says not every city requires a wall. When the hero of Shimon Gamaliel in this mission says, when you need a wall, when you're a border city. But if you're not, if it's an interior city, you don't really need a wall. V'Rabbanan, so that seems reasonable. What's the Tanakhama that says you always need a wall? What's their reasoning? Because you can get invaders that go beyond the border. It happens sometimes that not just border cities get attacked. So therefore, every city really benefits from a wall. Now, 1 second. Now, Bomine Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Lazar asks, Kishen Govin, when you tax people to build things for the city, Lefina Fashos Govin, or Lilma Lefishavach Mammon Govin? Is it a poll tax or an income tax, like a progressive tax? Rabbi Yochanan says, Lefi Mammon Govin. It's progressive. The rich have to pay more. But Lazar b'nei kavale masmaros, and he said, Lazar, my son, kavabe masmaros, like nail this to the wall. In other words, like, this is a hard and fast rule. Like, you can rely on this ruling. It's not a poll tax, it's a progressive tax. Ikad some read this as follows. When you tax, excuse me, to the people living closer to the wall, to the edge of the city, do they have to pay more than the people who live in the middle of the city because they're more at risk from invaders? Or maybe it's just by how much money people have. That's how you tax them. Well, he answers, you do take into account where you live, and the people at the edge have to pay more. And this is a serious ruling. You can rely on this. Rabbi Yehuda Rama Deshura Adrabanan. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he once taxed the needs for building a wall on the rabbis, as well as, like, he included the rabbis in the tax. Reish Lakish says, rabbis don't need protection. They're protected presumably by God. Dichsiv as parei mechol yirbun. The pasuk says, if I counted them, they would be more than the sand. As parei Laman, who count who? Ilema, what tzaddikim? If you say, if I count the tzaddikim, I'll find so many. There's so many tzaddikim. I don't think so. Hasha kol Yisrael ksibuhu. All of Israel is called Kachol Asher Al Sfasayam. The whole nation of Israel is like the sand on the sea. Tzaddikim asma mechol yirbiun. So can you say that that tzaddikim are that many? No, obviously not. Everybody's a tzaddik. This is what it means. Esperim, l'maseim shel tzaddikim. If I counted the good deeds of the tzaddikim, mechol yirviyun, they would be like the sand. V'kal v'chomer, and so we have this following kal v'chomer. Umachol shemuat, sand which doesn't even there isn't even as much sand as the good deeds of tzaddikim, according to this interpretation. The good deeds are even more than the sand. Megan Aliyam, and the sand protects the sea. Not even sure what that means. The sand protects the sea, but I guess it holds back the sea. Masem shel tzaddikim shem merubim. So good deeds of tzaddikim, which are even more than the sand, lo kol shekain shemaginim aleim, certainly will protect those tzaddikim. This is a very, kind of weak analogy, a weak drash. So you could knock it down from many sides, but anyway. When he came to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, I got a better source for you. How do I know that the rabbis don't need protection? This is from Shir Hashirim. I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. Ani choma zutara. I am a wall means is talking about the Torah. V'shadai kamigdalos, and the breasts that are referred to elu talmidei chachamim. These are the Torah scholars. So this indicates that that, like, if you study Torah, then you already have a wall, right? So where it says Reish Lakish Darash Rava, Reish Lakish preferred his explanation, which seemed a lot weaker to me, but because he understood this verse to be explained differently, like Rava. Anichama Zuknas Yisrael. The wall means the people of Israel. And the towers are the base medrash. So it's not referring specifically to protecting the Torah scholars, rather the buildings, the base medrash. Therefore, he preferred the other pasuk to show that Talmidei Chachamim don't need to participate in this tax to be protected. And we will stop here for today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.